Hi, my name's Leo and I'm a boat builder and a sailor. Back in 2017 I bought a very old and quite famous wooden sailing yacht for the price of $1, and since then, with the help of a lot of really amazing people, I have been rebuilding it from the keel up with the goal of sailing it back to England eventually, and the whole thing is funded by these YouTube videos. Now, every time I release a video, I get a lot of comments asking how we sharpen all our tools and keep them so sharp. So I thought I'd finally make a video about that process. Now, I intended to release this video a week ago, but due to life, I didn't get it finished, and so it was postponed to this week. So apologies to everyone who was waiting, and thank you for everyone for being so understanding. Well, almost everyone. I know a lot of you will be missing seeing progress on the boat, so I'm hoping to get the next video out just 1 week from now. So we're just going to run through a typical progression of the sharpening and use of a chisel, for example. And so it starts off with the desired edge angle if it's a new chisel or it's just been sharpened properly. And then as you use it, very often it's easier and quicker to just hone the very tip of the end. And so as you hone the tip, and there's various ways of doing that, the edge angle actually increases and gets wider. And then you use it more, it blunts, you hone it more, and every time you do that, the edge angle gets wider to the point where eventually it's not as sharp as you want, and at that stage you have to somehow regrind the entire bevel back to the desired edge angle to get it sharp again.
Right, sure.
But have you guys been converted?
To tea?
From coffee to tea?
There's a little coffee in my cup, it just dilutes it a little bit.
There's no rehab on planet Earth that can get me off of that addiction.
This video is going to be about sharpening edge tools. Who do you think's got the sharpest tools in the shop?
Well, probably me, because I use all of Leo's tools.
I was going to say Leo.
Yeah, I'd probably guess Leo's.
These are all quite
What do you think? Sharper tools are safer tools.
You don't have to use as much muscle and you can control them better and they're more predictable. And
You ever hear Richard's trick for planing down end grain with
Oh yeah. I use thin down linseed oil with paint thinner and put it on there. It softens it up. You know how it squeals when you're playing end grain on Purple Heart or oak? It just cuts really quickly.
Not on the tool, on the end grain itself.
Yeah, you just put it in there, it just soaks right in, softens it. I don't do it if I gotta glue it together,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Now we're mostly going to be looking at tools with a single bevel, like chisels and plane irons, because those are the tools that we use the most in woodworking. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the back. Now, of course, to have a sharp edge, as we've already talked about, you need two flat, smooth surfaces coming together. And this bevel is the one that we adjust and grind most often, but it can only be sharp if the back is also smooth and flat. Now, on an older chisel like this, there's actually quite a lot of pitting in the back of the blade, and that's pretty common. It was probably left somewhere and got really rusty at some point in its life. Now, when I sharpen that down all the way to that pitting, it's going to be very difficult to actually get this chisel sharp unless I take a lot more material off the back to get down past the level of the pitting so there's a smooth surface again. So whether you've got a new chisel or an old chisel, even brand new, you need to check the back is flat, and unless it's a very high quality chisel, it usually won't be completely flat, so you'll have to do some flattening, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. And really, you don't need the entire blade to be flat on the back. It's nice if it is, but it's really just the cutting edge here. So I usually try and get the final inch or so to be a really nice flat mirror surface. So I've just taken this old chisel, which I had in a drawer, which I'd never ever sharpened, and the back was pretty rusty and actually not very pitted, but a lot of surface rust, very dirty. And I flattened the back starting with sandpaper, which I put on the jointer table because it's a nice flat surface, it's been milled flat, and then working up through diamond stones, which is what I tend to use. I use these DMT double-sided diamond stones, highly recommend them, and started with the very coarse and then worked my way up through the grades. I've got 2 of these, so with the 4 sides that goes from very coarse to very fine. So I've flattened the back and I've polished it to a pretty fine finish. I couldn't flatten it right to the very end because the way this chisel was sharpened previously, which is pretty common unfortunately, is it was given a little back bevel here. That little back bevel I'm going to take out by just grinding all the way through it from the other side when I make my main bevel. So once we've got a nice flat back on our edge tool, and that step really, flattening the back, I think really is the most important step of all. It's often overlooked, it can take a long time, but it really is the foundation of a sharp edge tool. So spend time getting it really flat. Once we've got it flat, we can focus on the top bevel and actually make this thing sharp. Now that process can be separated into 3 different operations, I think: grinding, honing, and deburring. They're not always all necessary, but we're going to look at them in that order. Now it's time to grind the bevel, and the grinding is really the process of taking off a lot of material to make our initial bevel here on the top of the blade. And that can be done in one of many ways. It's usually done using a mechanical grinding wheel, either horizontal or vertical. This is a vertical wheel, and I tend to use vertical wheels because it gives you a hollow bevel, a hollow ground, because of the radius of the wheel, which can be useful. Now this grinding wheel behind me is a dry grinding wheel, so it's a coarse abrasive disc that spins very fast and has no cooling or lubrication. Now these are pretty cheap because it's just a motor connected directly to the wheel, there's no gearing. So this is a pretty common thing to find in a workshop, and this is what I learnt to sharpen chisels on. Alright, well I've got a couple of old school standard dry bench grinders down here. Neither of them are actually set up very well for sharpening because most of us use the whetstone grinder upstairs. But if you are going to be using a grinder like these, there's a few things to set it up. First of all, you're going to want to have a tool to dress the stone with, so I would recommend getting something like this. There'll be links to all of these tools down below the video in the description, and this is used for flattening and evening out the shape of the grinding wheel, and actually it's good to put a very slight convex shape on this, a little round to it, and it'll grind better in the middle and it'll be easier to sharpen your chisels on. The next thing you're going to want if you're using these a lot is an adjustable tool rest like this. This is a pretty rubbish one that is attached to the grinder. It does work, but if you're using these a lot, I would recommend throwing this away and getting a nice fully adjustable one which screws down to the bench. Veritas makes a really nice one. Again, I'll link it below the video. Now, if you're just replicating the bevel that's on the chisel already, you can just put it on the tool rest and get down low and adjust it until it looks about right. And then as you grind, you can double check and make sure it's grinding in the right place. If you want to grind it to a specific angle, you can make one of these. This is just a plywood template, it could be also made out of cardboard, and you can just put this on here. This is very easy to make yourself, of course, and then you just set it to your desired angle. Of course, looking at the bottom here, because that's where the chisel is going to be, and then that would give me a nice 30-degree bevel. Now I'm actually going to hollow grind the primary bevel on this chisel using the other bench grinder, which actually does not have an adjustable tool rest. It just has a square static tool rest that you can't move, which isn't good for much really, but that was all we had in the workshop where I learnt to sharpen chisels, and I think it's good to be able to use that just in case you're in a position where for some reason you don't have an adjustable tool rest. What I do is just use my finger as a rest here against the tool rest, and I have my thumb against the end of the chisel right up on the grindstone here. So the finger controls the angle. So if the finger is closer to the end, it's going to be a steeper angle. If the finger is further back, it's going to be a shallower angle. And so I just keep that finger in the same place, move it back and forwards. The reason for the thumb on the end is that you can tell when it's getting too hot, and so that's the big disadvantage of these machines. They get very hot and they make your tool very hot, and if it gets too hot it will temper, which means it'll go a little bit black, the metal will go a little bit black, and it'll lose its strength. Lots of people will know about metal and will be able to explain that better than me, but it makes the metal brittle, and it's a bad thing. So you have to make sure it doesn't get too hot at the end, and at the end it's very, very thin, so it's very easy for it to get hot. So I've got a little tub of water here. I'm going to put on my protection and just grind. So this is a pretty coarse wheel and it's already taken off quite a lot. What I'm doing is just when it's getting too hot for my thumb to stay on there, that's when it's time to put it in the water and cool it down again. But it's important to dry it off afterwards. So I'm told, because the theory is that water, if you get too much water in these grindstones, it can swell them up and they can explode. I don't know how true that is, but I've always been taught to dry off the water before you put it back on. So I'm going to grind away a little bit more. I've got to grind away all the way back to get rid of this part of the back, which I couldn't flatten because someone had put a back bevel on this. Alright, so I've got a nice bevel on here. It's one continuous bevel. And the trick to getting that nice, smooth, continuous bevel like that, rather than lots of different bevels, is making sure you keep your finger there, even when you take the chisel off to dip it in the water and to dry it off on your jeans or whatever. Make sure you keep your finger in the same place, because that's what dictates the angle here. Now the other disadvantage about using a high-speed grinder like this is that when you get the very end of the blade hot and then quench it in water, it can apparently develop tiny hairline fractures and cracks in the very edge of the blade, which you can't see with the naked eye, but which will prevent it from getting really, really sharp. So this is a very effective tool and is used in many, many workshops around the world, and it's what I learnt on to do your grinding. It's not what I use now. I think there are better tools, but it's cheap and you'll find it anywhere, and it's worth getting practice on this to be able to put a nice bevel into a chisel. So now I've got a nice clean bevel on the top of the blade, so I'm happy with that, and now it's time to talk about honing. In most cases, depending on what tool you're using, you're going to want to hone the blade to put a secondary bevel on it. So right now we've got a hollow grind, and so to put our final bevel on, we're going to be using diamond stones. You can also use water stones or a variety of other stones. Or if you use Tormek, which we'll talk about in a bit, you don't have to do this step at all, but we'll get to that in a minute. So to hone this, because it's a hollow ground, I can actually put it on the stone and feel when both the back and the front of the bevel are touching the diamond stone. So what that'll do is put a little flat on the front and the back of the bevel. That will just copy the angle of the bevel, depending on what I grinded at. I didn't use a gauge to grind this, because I don't have it set up on that machine, but I have got a little gauge here. It actually came out at exactly 25 degrees, which was a lucky guess. So I'm going to start off honing this by hand on the diamond stone, on the sort of medium fine side of the stone, and we'll see what that looks like. As you can see very clearly, it just contacts the metal on the front and the back of the bevel there, and that means that you keep the same angle, which can be quite useful. So this is approximately a 25-degree angle, and if I deburred this now, it would be a razor sharp blade that I could shave with. But I want to, before I do that, show you some other ways of honing, of putting secondary bevels on a chisel like this. So this is the kind of freehand method, which works well if you've got a hollow ground blade. If that is difficult, or you're not able to get a nice clean hollow ground for some reason, it does take a bit of practice to be able to do that on one of those grinders by hand, so you might end up with a less clean bevel here. You might want to use a guide, a honing guide, to set the angle of the secondary bevel at the front of the main bevel. So this is not a very good quality one. I think Veritas make a good one, but this will take a chisel in here or a plain iron in the larger slot, and so you just put it in, and then on the side it's got a little key. It says chisel projection 30 millimeters for 30 degrees. So then I can just take it over to my diamond stone here, just put the wheel down onto the diamond stone and hone it like this, and it's very easy, and that will give me a repeatable secondary bevel that I can do again and again, even if I don't have a clean primary bevel. Again, I might want to go through the grades on this. I might want to do this with the fine and then go on to the very fine. Okay, and so now, regardless of whether I've done this by hand with a nice clean hollow bevel, or whether I've done it with a honing guide, regardless of how nice my primary bevel is, I've now got a nice secondary bevel on the front of the blade, a nice flat back. Now there's also a very small burr left on here, this little ridge on the end, on the sharp edge of the tool, which stops it from being sharp, so we have to get rid of the burr. They can be very hard to see with the eye, but you can usually feel them. If you run your finger along the back of the chisel, you can usually feel a little ridge right at the end there. And they're usually pretty easy to get rid of. Just get some leather and you just kind of strop it against the leather like that. This is also kind of fine honing really of the blade. Not only does this help get rid of the burr, but it actually sharpens the edge. It seems to have got rid of it. And after you've done that on some regular leather, you can do it on some fine leather, otherwise known as human skin. So to get a really fine polished edge on here, you can just go against your hand. You have to be careful, obviously, make sure you're going the right way. This is now a razor sharp edge, and if I was to slip or do it the wrong way, I could really injure myself. So I guess I wouldn't recommend using your hand, but it is a handy piece of fairly fine leather that you always have with you. Now this should be razor sharp, and I can test it by cutting some of my hair. And that's sharp enough for general use. Sometimes if you're cutting some difficult wood, you might want to take a little extra care to lap the back up to a finer grit and hone the main bevel a little more to get it really, really razor sharp. So up until now, I've mostly been talking about the principles of sharpening and basically the easiest way to sharpen chisels and plane irons with the most readily available simple tools. So simple bench grinder and any sort of sharpening stone, whether it's diamond stone or a water stone. And that is the way that I sharpened all my tools for many years, until a few years ago I got a machine which greatly sped up the process and is now the only thing I use to sharpen all my tools pretty much every day. And that is this machine. It's a Tormek T8, a machine made in Sweden. This video is not sponsored by them. They didn't give me this or anything. This, in my opinion, is the best sharpening system available, although I haven't tried them all, so who knows. I'm not going to go too deep into this because I know not everyone will have one of these and not everyone can afford one. They're not the cheapest things in the world, but I will tell you roughly how it works and why it's worth it if you have to do a lot of sharpening. Okay, so for the purposes of showing you how this machine works, I've just grabbed an old plane that I picked up at a yard sale somewhere. It's rusty, it's been sitting in someone's garage for a decade probably. If I take the plane iron out, we'll see. It's in pretty bad shape. It's got a lot of rust on it. Hopefully not too much pitting. It's hard to see actually right now. But I'm going to see how quickly I can get this plane iron into good shape, pretty much only using this machine. Wet stone grinders generally spin a lot slower than dry bench grinders, and so they have to have gearing inside them, so it's a more complex machine, one of the reasons why it costs a bit more. And the water cools down and lubricates the machine. So with this one actually, it comes with a standard stone, but I've actually got the diamond stone wheels for it. So I'm going to put on the coarsest one for this at the beginning. Oof. Okay, this is one problem with the Tormek that I found, and this doesn't happen very often, but when these don't get changed for a while, a couple of these have got some mild steel in there or bad quality stainless, and they've actually kind of welded themselves, rusted themselves to the shaft. So That doesn't happen if you change it often or if you grease it properly, but I have had this happen once before. This must not have been changed for a couple of weeks. And because there's water going all over it, it is susceptible to rust. So I'm going to try and sort that out now. Okay, so that was a pain in the ass, but that is literally the only complaint I've got with this machine. That's happened twice over the 3 years I've had it, probably. Okay, so now I've got the coarse diamond stone wheel on here, and I'm going to start by trying to flatten the back of this. And you can see I'm using the side of the wheel here, the flat part for this. This I could be doing on a diamond stone or sandpaper, but this is quicker. So now really quickly I've got the end inch or so of this plane iron really flat, and it's pretty coarse, so you can see the lines in it like coarse sandpaper, but I'm going to get to polishing that up to a finer grade later on. Right now I'm going to work on the bevel. You can see the bevel's not much good. It's kind of rounded over this way, the wrong way, so it's convex instead of concave, and it's really blunt. So I'm going to flip this machine around. It has this neat thing, and I'm going to move this jig holder. I'm going to use this jig. Now this works exactly the same for a chisel. So again, I'm not going to go into the fine details, but basically this gizmo lets you set an angle, and then you move this up and down to get that angle, and then it's very repeatable. So here we go. I'm going to sharpen this top bevel now. You can see it's getting there. One of the nice things about this machine is it's pretty quiet, it's pretty safe, you can't really hurt yourself on it. I'm sure you could if you really tried. You don't need to wear eye protection or ear protection. I know there's going to be someone out there saying that I should be wearing eye protection, but literally in the manual they say you don't have to wear eye protection. So I'm sticking to my guns on this one. So you should be able to see now that this bevel is one nice, continuous, clean bevel. Again, it's pretty rough because this is a very coarse stone. I can feel a nice burr there. But if I took this burr off right now, it would probably be razor sharp in just the course of 5 minutes. But I'm going to take it down to the finer grits to make sure it's really sharp. So this is the fine diamond stone wheel, and I'm going to put that on, put the bath back on. There's a nifty magnet in the bath as well which catches all of the iron filings. I'm going to just leave this on the jig right now because that'll save me a little bit of time. And you can see where that started to give a much finer, more of a mirror finish at the top, the end of the blade there. Now whenever you're lapping the back, the flat side of a plain iron or a chisel, whether it's on a wet grinding wheel like this or a diamond stone or a whetstone, you have to be really careful not to put a bevel on the bottom of the iron. So I always sort of, when I first put it down, I always put it down at the back first and then go down, because if you do even a tiny bit of grinding like that, you put a back bevel on here, a bevel on the bottom, and that basically means all the hard work you did flattening out the bottom is for nothing, because you've put a slope on it right at the important critical bit. Back bevels do have a time and a place, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So I'm just putting the back down first here, and then letting the front touch the wheel afterwards. It's getting the same bevel as it was on the previous stone. And then the other really cool thing about this machine is this honing strop. So this is a leather wheel here. I'm going to put a little bit of honing compound on here because I haven't done that for a long time. The honing compound is just a very fine abrasive compound, I think, which helps the leather do its work, and this should take off the burr and put a finer edge on the blade. Like that. Now, this is still by no means a pretty blade. It's still got rust on it and stuff, but in probably 10 minutes or less, I've made it into a razor sharp blade from being really rough and pitted. This thing has saved me countless hours, and they have a lot of jigs for it, so you can sharpen almost anything on this tool within reason. I mean, you can do long planer knives, axes, knives, carving chisels, gouges, even drill bits if you have the right jig. So if you want really sharp tools and you don't want to spend a lot of time doing it, this is the tool for you if you can afford it. Otherwise, you can get by just fine using a bench grinder. You just have to be a bit patient, making sure you don't overheat the tool. It's not quite as pleasant to do. And stones, of course, diamond stones or water stones. A lot of people swear by water stones. I've just never really got into using them. I've always had these diamond stones. But I do actually use these still a lot for lapping the backs of planes and chisels. I was kind of just showing how fast you can do it on the Tormek if you're repairing a really messed up blade, but just for sort of daily maintenance, I will use these DMT diamond stones. They're really, really excellent. Now this plane iron is nice and sharp. Maybe I should just clean up this plane, just do a super quick job getting the rust off it. Alright, so I've pretty much finished my quick and dirty plane restoration. This is a Stanley Bailey number 3. It's a smoothing plane, and George helped me figure out the year. Apparently it's a Type 19, which means it was built between 1948 and 1961. Now I just grabbed this one off the rack because it was the dirtiest and had the worst blade, as a good example of how easy it is to sharpen and clean up a messed up blade on this machine. But it's actually turned into a pretty nice smoothing plane, so I will be using this. I didn't do that thorough a job. I got pretty bored of lapping the bottom because that can take a long time, but it's pretty nice and flat. And it's all clean and the blade is sharp, so let's test it out.
I need to grind this chisel a little bit to get a little better edge and to get a hollow grind on it with the wheel here. It is round and it creates, when you grind it, a nice hollow. And that makes honing it real easy because you're only honing the front end and a little bit of the back end because of the shape. The first thing I do is I'll check and see what the angle's looking like. I'm grinding maybe a little, I got a little too much angle, but it's about right. So I'm just going to bump this a little bit, change the angle. So I'm going to put a lot less pressure as I get close to the edge so I don't heat it up, push it too hard. And it's not that hot. I can put my finger on it all right. I almost got to the edge now. So I like to use a coarse stone because it doesn't heat up the metal so much when you're grinding. It's going to grind, it's going to hone a little bit there and a little bit on the edge. And you don't need to hone the whole thing out. You just hone it enough so you get a burr you can feel right there. A strop. I sometimes I use the back of my belt. That works too. So we got this tend to shine up quite a bit. We don't feel any burr. Let's see if it cuts hair. Oh yeah, it's cutting hair nice. Happy sharpening.
My favoriteest way of sharpening is the Tormek machine. I like diamond stones for a working environment. It's pretty easy if you've got a nice hollow grind from the Tormek or from a bench grinder. Richard Wilmore is who taught me how to sharpen planes and chisels. When I met the man, I was straight out of framing houses. I'll admit it, I had been using chisels to open paint cans and stuff and just making chicken salad out of anything I cut. I still have the remnants of a hollow grind on my block plane iron that I got from the Tormek. Yeah, it's not super square, but perfect 90 is pretty hard to get. And just a little bit of working back and forth. You can see a little bit of slurry. If it's rolling up on the plane, you know that you're sharpening the tip. Back and forth works. A lot of guys will do the circle. A lot of people will say that the circle makes it sharper quicker. I have no opinion. What makes it sharper quicker is the Tormek. But this is just to keep moving. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it's really not much more than that. It's not intensive. I can almost feel a little burr. Knock that off. You flip the stone over and go finer if you like.
Alright, I'm going to talk a little bit about different edge angles for different applications. Now if we take a chisel, you can sharpen the bevel on chisel, you can hone it to whatever angle you want, but most commonly they're sharpened to 25 or 30 degrees. Now the finer the edge angle, the sharper it's going to be, but the more delicate that edge will be and the quicker it will go blunt. I actually just sharpen all of my chisels to 30 degrees because that way I don't have to remember what's what. They're all the same, and I use a lot of hardwoods, and I find that 30-degree edge just lasts a little bit longer. Now the really nice thing about this Tormek T8 is that the angle setting is very easy and repeatable using this jig and the angle setter here. There are other jigs and other tools where you can easily set the angle, but basically if I know this is 30 degrees, I set it on here at 30 degrees, and then very quickly I can grind it back to a razor sharp edge. And because it's so repeatable, and because this is such a fine diamond wheel or grinding wheel, I don't have to hone it. There's no honing required once you've done your initial primary bevel grinding and then stropped it on the leather wheel. That's it. So it's super quick. Now with planes, things are a little bit different. There's two types of planes, broadly speaking. There's lots of different types of planes, but generally they can all be fit into two categories: bevel up planes and bevel down planes. And what that means is that your plane iron the blade either has the bevel facing up when it's cutting or the bevel facing down when it's cutting. And generally, if the bevel is up, then the iron will be at a much shallower angle, and like this one. And if the bevel is facing down, it'll be a steeper angle, like this one. And these usually have a chip breaker on the back, like this, and a movable frog, whereas the bevel up planes don't have any of that stuff. So when you're cutting wood with a tool like this, the critical angle is actually the angle at which the blade attacks the wood. And on a chisel, that depends how you hold it, really. On a plane, that depends how the blade is orientated, and sometimes on the angle of the bevel. But on a bevel down plane like this, the angle of the bevel, this angle, doesn't actually affect the angle at which the blade hits the wood. That is determined by the angle of the frog. This is the frog, just the piece which holds the blade. You get some planes which have a more vertical frog. Some of them are even 90 degrees, and they're more like scraper planes. But often they're sort of 45 like this. And then the angle you grind into the bottom doesn't matter so much, as long as it's not so big that the back of the bevel is going to hit the wood before the front of the bevel. So basically, on bevel down planes, I grind them all to 30 degrees because it's the same as the chisels, it's easy to remember, and it's going to last a little bit longer than a really fine bevel. There's no point putting a really fine bevel on this because it's not going to change the angle at which the blade hits the wood. Now, bevel up planes are different. The angle that you grind your bevel at in a bevel up plane does determine the angle at which it's cutting the wood. So you can change this angle and it will change the cutting characteristics of this plane. So again, I like to keep it simple. I grind all my bevel up planes to 25 degrees because that makes them really nice and sharp, good for cutting end grain and stuff like that. And generally the bevel up planes are usually the smaller block planes, or there's a couple of bigger bevel up planes as well, but usually I use them for difficult grain, and so that 25 degree bevel helps them be really sharp, and they've got this low angle of attack. They're often called low angle block planes. That's my system: bevel up planes 25 degrees, bevel down planes and chisels 30 degrees, and I find that works really well for all the work that I do, and most importantly, it's simple and easy to remember. Now, this is my daily use block plane. It hasn't been sharpened for a little while. I need to do something with it today actually, and it's getting a little blunt, so I'm just going to sharpen this right now, and that's going to be really, really quick and easy. So I'm going to put it in this jig. So resharpening this blade just then took no time at all, probably less than a minute, because the angle was already set and it already had a flat back, and now it's ready to use. It's ready to shave with if I wanted to, and I might do that 5 or 10 times in a day if I'm working with some difficult end grain or planing on teak. Alright, now we're nearly done. I've just got a couple more quick tips that could save you a lot of time. Now, the first is that we want to make sure our edge here is square to the side of our blade. And so if you're sharpening an old chisel, completely redressing a blade, I recommend getting a little square and basically just drawing along the edge, drawing a line right at the end that's square. And then you can actually grind down to that line on the grinder, just grinding it completely blunt there. And then you start grinding your bevel in and grind down, and then you'll be starting out square. While I'm maintaining my blades, I like to use this small luthier square just to check that it's staying square as I grind it. And I like this thin one because in the Tormek it actually fits in the jig, so you don't have to take the tool out of the jig to check it. On that jig there is an adjustment to change this angle, and you can use that to make sure these are square. Now another tip is if you don't have time to flatten out the back completely, you can put a little back bevel on here intentionally. This is more commonly done with plane irons because with chisels it does affect how you can use the chisel. You can't flush cut quite so well with it, but I'm just going to use this as an example. When putting a back bevel on, the problem with it is it's hard to make it repeatable, and so it's not consistent. But if you can figure out a way of keeping it repeatable, I like to use, if I do ever do this, just a thin 6-inch rule like this, and you know, a set size of grindstone. And if I put the rule here on this edge of it, and then put the chisel, so it's like that, I can grind here a little bit, trying to keep that distance the same, this distance here, and because the back of the chisel is raised slightly, it's giving me a little back bevel right on the end here. And as long as I use the same ruler and the same grindstone in the same way, I can actually repeat that back bevel and get it consistent. Now, I would be very reluctant to do that with a chisel. With a plane iron, if it's in bad condition, I'd say that's a reasonable thing to do. Now, we talked earlier about the leather strop wheel on the Tormek, or just using a pad of leather or a belt or something to strop your tools and hone them. Now, I actually sometimes like to do that when I've been using the tool just for a little bit, rather than actually sharpening it, honing it on a stone or a wheel, just dropping it on the leather. If you just used it a little bit, that will bring back just the really sharp razor edge for another few minutes or a little bit more use until you actually need to sharpen it or hone it properly. All right, and I think that's enough. We covered quite a lot today and yesterday and the day before. So we better wrap it up, but I hope you found this useful. I know there's a lot of information. I didn't know there was so much to say about sharpening, to be honest, until I started making this video. I know there's a lot of other ways to do this that people are gonna talk about. People have found their own way which they might think is better. There really is no right or wrong way. If you're getting sharp tools, then that's great and that's correct for you. If there is anyone out there who has been struggling to get their tools really sharp, I hope some of the tips in this video might help you to get them sharp and be more effective and efficient in your woodworking. I know we haven't looked at the boat very much in this video. It turns out there was just so much to talk about with sharpening that there wasn't much time to fit anything else in. But anyway, thanks a lot for supporting that project. Thanks a lot for watching this video. Massive thank you to everyone who has donated or otherwise supported the Tally-Ho rebuild. It makes these videos possible, it makes that work possible, and I really appreciate it. So I'll see you next time. Cheers.